One fateful evening, as I sat in our dimly lit living room, nursing a cup of chamomile tea, my husband, Charles, dropped a bombshell that left me utterly speechless. "So, I hear you inherited $6 million after your father passed away," he said, his voice disturbingly casual. My grip on the porcelain cup tightened, my heart pounded in my chest. How did he know? I had deliberately kept that information from him, fearing his reaction. I had been contemplating divorce for months, wary of his increasing control over my life and his apparent greed. Yet, here he was, already scheming, already assuming control over money that wasn't his. I barely had time to compose myself when he flashed a grin and nonchalantly added, "We should use some of it to remodel the house. It could use a serious upgrade." Shocked, I confronted him, demanding to know how he had found out. His smirk deepened as he confessed, without an ounce of shame, that he had pressured my mother into revealing the truth. The audacity left me seething. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about betrayal, manipulation, and complete disregard for my autonomy. His dismissiveness only fueled my anger. "You don't need to worry about it," he continued, "the decision has already been made. My name is Patricia, I'm 31 years old, a dedicated professional working at a prominent bank. My demanding career left me little time to meet people, so I had taken a chance on a matchmaking agency. That's where I met Charles, a year older than me, a livery driver with a quick wit and a disarming charm. I had been drawn to his easygoing nature, his seemingly boundless enthusiasm for life. I thought I had found someone who admired my ambition, who saw me as an equal. We had married 4 years ago, and in the beginning, our relationship flourished. Charles was supportive, loving, and endlessly complimentary of my work ethic. But as time passed, his admiration twisted into something else, sarcasm laced with resentment, subtle jabs at my income, and an ever-growing list of expectations. The shift was slow but undeniable. His once affectionate words turned into passive-aggressive remarks about how much more I earned than him. My in-laws, too, had begun to change. At first, they had welcomed me warmly, eager to boast about their son's marriage to a successful banker. But soon, their interest in me waned, replaced by veiled demands. "Patricia, you earn good money, why don't you buy us nice things now and then?" my mother-in-law asked one day, her voice honeyed but firm. I had recently gifted her a beautiful dress for her birthday, yet it seemed that wasn't enough. I politely but firmly declined. "I have a policy," I explained. "I don't lend or borrow money, not even with family." Her face twisted in anger. "We only tolerated this marriage because of your high-paying job. Frankly, you're too opinionated for our liking." My father-in-law scoffed. "What's the point of having a daughter-in-law who doesn't support her husband's family financially? We expect birthday gifts, cash even, and you still refuse?" Charles sat beside them, nodding along, offering no defense, no support. His silence cut deeper than their words ever could. Meanwhile, his spending habits grew reckless. Lavish takeout orders, unnecessary home decor, gadgets we didn't need, he bought them all without discussion. "You make good money, it's fine," he'd shrug when I questioned him. But it wasn't fine. I was exhausted. I was done. Divorce was my only escape. However, each time I tried to bring it up, he brushed it off. "Divorce? I'm too tired to talk about that today. Let's discuss it later," he would say, dismissing my concerns. Then, one afternoon, my mother called, her voice trembling. "Patricia, listen carefully, it's about your father." Dread gripped me. My father's recent health checkup had revealed something terrible. Cancer, advanced stage. Time was slipping through our fingers. I rushed to the hospital, barely registering Charles's indifferent inquiry as I hurried past him. At the hospital, my mother and I made the difficult decision to tell my father the truth. He had always valued honesty. He deserved to know. When I returned home, my heart heavy with grief, Charles greeted me with a chilling question. "So, how bad is it?" I told him, barely holding myself together. His response was as heartless as ever. "Oh, weren't you talking about a divorce? If you want to dump more stress on your dying father, we can finalize it whenever you're ready." The last remnants of love I had for him disintegrated in that moment. Still, I couldn't put my father through additional heartbreak. I had to wait. Charles grew bolder, even daring to ask about my father's inheritance while the man was still fighting for his life. "So, how much are we talking about? I mean, I'm his son-in-law, I should get a share, right?" Disgusted, I shut down the conversation. I moved in with my parents, prioritizing my father's final days over my sham of a marriage. When my father passed away, his loss shattered us. We barely had time to grieve before funeral arrangements took over. Amid this sorrow, I called Charles to inform him. "So, your dad finally passed away, huh? Sorry for your loss, but I don't feel like attending the funeral, too much hassle." His words were a final nail in the coffin of our marriage. "Do whatever you want," I replied, my voice devoid of warmth. "Why are you so upset?" he mocked. "By the way, I'm curious about the inheritance." I hung up. I couldn't bear another second of his greed. Charles didn't attend the funeral. Some called him heartless, but I was relieved. We didn't need his presence tainting my father's farewell. After the funeral, my family gathered to settle my father's estate. Thanks to his careful planning, everything was handled smoothly. I found some comfort in the process, a sense of closure amid the grief. Then, Charles struck. "Hey, it's been a while. I've decided to use the $6 million you inherited to renovate our home," he announced smugly when I returned. I stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. He chuckled, amused by my confusion. "I had a chat with your mom." And just like that, I knew he had crossed the final line. This marriage was over, for good. I would eventually come to regret my decision. "From now on, we'll communicate through my lawyer," Charles stated coldly, extending a business card toward me. His expression was unreadable, but his words carried a weight that made my stomach turn. Then, with a subtle yet undeniable demand, he added, "And don't forget to transfer the inheritance to my account." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned away, silently beginning to pack my belongings. The air between us was thick with unresolved tension, and I had no interest in prolonging the inevitable confrontation. As I stepped out the door, Charles's voice followed me, a final, insistent reminder, "Don't forget about the inheritance." Once I arrived at my parents' home and recounted the events to my mother, she was visibly shaken. She had always known there was tension between Charles and me, but she hadn't realized just how deep the rift had grown. The realization of her unintentional role in the matter, the fact that she had mentioned the inheritance under pressure, filled her with guilt. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice laced with regret. "I had no idea he would take it this far." I placed my hand over hers reassuringly. "It's all right, Mom. I should have been more open with you, but what's truly unforgivable is that he coerced you into revealing such private information." With her support, I was able to stay at our family home while I figured out my next steps. The following day, my phone buzzed incessantly, call after call from Charles. I ignored every single one. When that failed, he resorted to showing up unannounced, hammering the doorbell repeatedly, causing an unnecessary commotion in front of my parents' house. Concerned by the disruption, my mother gently suggested, "Maybe you should just speak with him, Patricia. It might not resolve anything, but if he escalates, we can call the police." Though reluctant, I understood her concern. So, with the security chain fastened, I cracked open the door just enough to see Charles's face, an expression of impatience and frustration. "This is getting out of hand, Patricia. When are you transferring that $6 million? I can't finish the renovations without it." His voice was strained, bordering on desperate. His hands clenched into fists as he resisted the urge to push the door open further. I remained calm. "It's under consideration." His brows knitted together in confusion. "What do you mean, under consideration?" Taking a deep breath, I leveled my gaze at him. "The inheritance I received is my father's vacation house. It's not cash, Charles. I can't simply transfer it to you." Shock flickered across his face, the realization hitting him like a blow to the gut. Seizing the opportunity, I pressed further. "And how exactly did you manage to secure a $6 million renovation contract without proof of funds?" He hesitated before admitting, "I have a relative in construction. I told them I'd be getting $6 million soon, so they skipped the usual checks." A smirk played on my lips as I delivered the final blow. "If that's the case, then you should remember." I let my words hang in the air before closing the door firmly in his face, shutting out any further protest. Inside, a wave of relief washed over me. I had finally taken control, finally stood my ground. There was no doubt left in my mind. Distancing myself from Charles was the best decision I had ever made. His voice rang out from the other side of the door, filled with disbelief and anger. "You've got to be kidding me. I already paid a deposit of $5,000 for the renovations, and I was going to cover the rest in installments. Now what am I supposed to do? His desperation was evident, but I felt no sympathy. The wife's property is the husband's too, right? Even if it's not cash, that $6 million house is still ours. We're still married, aren't we? He grasped at straws, trying to twist reality to suit his needs. I let out a bitter chuckle. You've got it all wrong, Charles. Inherited property isn't shared, it's mine, and mine alone. Not a cent belongs to you, and let's be clear, we are no longer a couple. As far as I'm concerned, we're total strangers. His desperation turned to fury, his face flushed deep red, his voice rising. Stop playing games. I'm calling off the divorce. Give me the inheritance right now. He reached through the small opening, trying to force his way in. At that moment, my mother, witnessing the aggression, quickly dialed the police. Charles withdrew his hand at the sound of her voice on the phone but sneered as he backed away. I'm done with you, he spat before storming off. The police arrived shortly after, and upon reviewing footage from the doorbell camera, they suggested that further legal action could be taken against him. They advised me to keep my doors locked, to avoid any future engagement with Charles, and, if necessary, pretend I wasn't home. Days later, another shock awaited me. The police contacted me about my father's real estate documents. I had kept them in my bag after moving back home, but now they were missing. My heart sank. Had Charles truly stooped so low? My fears were confirmed when I arrived at the station. Charles stood there, caught red-handed. His face was pale, his posture defeated. Why, Charles? I demanded, anger boiling beneath my skin. His voice was barely above a whisper. I thought you might have kept cash in your bag, so I went through it. When I saw documents about the inheritance, I figured they were valuable and took them. But his desperation hadn't stopped there. After realizing the documents weren't for liquid assets, he had taken them to a real estate agent, attempting to sell the vacation home himself. He even brought his parents along, hoping to bolster his claim. However, upon my arrival, it became clear to the agency that the sale was fraudulent. The property still legally belonged to my father, and the title had yet to be transferred to my name. Without my consent, there was no sale. When confronted, my in-laws made a ludicrous suggestion. You should just buy the property yourself, Patricia. It belonged to your father-in-law. After all, the real estate agency, fed up with the blatant deceit, called the police. Charles, caught in his own web of lies, pleaded desperately. I was just trying to sell it on her behalf. I didn't steal anything. I folded my arms, unimpressed. That's not true. You stole those documents and tried to sell what was never yours. Just own up to your actions. Cornered, Charles lashed out in frustration. You set me up. I scoffed. You did this to yourself. Now face the consequences. With undeniable evidence, Charles was arrested. My in-laws, humiliated, attempted to retaliate against the real estate agency, but their antics only led to further legal trouble. In the end, they were left financially and socially ruined, drowning in the consequences of their own greed. As for me, I had finally severed the last thread tying me to Charles. I could now move forward, cherishing the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim, ready to embrace a future free from manipulation and deceit.